The night Odessa was quietly cut from the Banquet honoree list, her silver pin shimmered alone on a velvet chair, while the room applauded someone else. Names Hollis, 58. I used to write foundation reports until I started reading between the lines. Ever watched someone let go of a medal on purpose? What would you do if the quietest person in the room turned out to be the one holding it all together? I remember the sound of her shoes, low heels tapping once, twice, and then fading into the hush of polished linoleum. Odessa Wren Halberg had just been removed from the annual honoree list. Quietly, without protest, no grandstanding, no scene, just a small, reserved smile and a calm, measured walk to the exit. On her seat, she left behind something that clinked faintly against the cushion as she rose, a silver pin shaped like a folded flag. I hadn't noticed the missing name at first. My eyes had skimmed the printed program, flipping past the list of honorees like one absent-mindedly turns a menu. But then Odessa walked in dignified, in her navy blue dress hair, pinned with precision, the very embodiment of civic decorum. The seat at the far end of the banquet table, hers presumably, remained conspicuously empty. She paused beside it just a moment too long. Then, without looking at anyone directly, she sat down elsewhere. Cambria Laudelane, the committee chair, had smiled as Odessa entered, but the corners of her lips held tension like a rubber band stretched too far. "Let's begin," she said crisply. "Tonight's about highlighting fresh voices, stories that resonate, impact that multiplies." I shifted in my seat. Cambria had always known how to craft a theme. She was the kind of woman who could recite a mission statement backwards in a fire drill. Her heels were too high for her stride, but she made it work, clicking her way around town like a brand ambassador for civic virtue. Martinson, seated beside her, gave a non-committal nod. He had the kind of face that would have made him a good pastor, gentle-eyed, soft-jawed, capable of forgiving even in action. But tonight he merely sat there, benign and unmoving, as names were read out, applause rang, and photos of smiling volunteers rotated on the projector screen. When Cambria reached the healthcare impact segment, my breath caught slightly. Odessa's name had always been there 14 years at the Veterans Clinic through funding droughts and flu seasons and 3 separate remodels. Instead, Cambria read, "And now let's recognize Chandler Morell for launching a mindfulness pilot for teen trauma recovery." Odessa didn't flinch. She clapped softly like someone politely acknowledging a poem they didn't understand. Her eyes, though, wandered past the speaker, past the slides, resting momentarily on a speckled section of ceiling tile where water damage had long ago dried into a brownish halo. She didn't look confused. She looked finished. 10 minutes later, she stood. "Excuse me," she whispered, half to herself, half to no one in particular. She slid her chair back quietly, gathered her coat, and walked out. I watched her leave. Nobody else did. Cambria continued talking about impact metrics and narrative framing. The audience clapped in choreographed bursts. Odessa's seat remained unclaimed. When the meeting adjourned, I lingered, unsure what I was waiting for. I stood up, stretching my legs, and that's when I saw it, the pin. Resting neatly on the chair cushion. Oval-shaped silver engraved faintly with a caduceus and stars around its border. I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected, solid, not ornamental. The kind of thing earned, not bought. The metal was warm, like it had been worn close to the body for years. I turned it in my palm, noticing how the overhead fluorescent lights flicked against its curved surface. Cambria saw me holding it. Her reaction was immediate and mechanical. "Oh," she said with a shrug. "She probably dropped that." I studied her. Her tone was light, but her eyes darted. Not nervous exactly, more like someone closing a file cabinet they didn't want reopened. "No," I said, almost to myself. She didn't forget. She let it go. The words hung there oddly loud in the now empty room. Outside, I could hear the faint churn of rain against the sidewalk and the distant beep of a reversing delivery truck. The Civic Center, once echoing with claps and ceremonial laughter, had already returned to its usual sterility. I pocketed the pin, feeling its weight press against the inside of my jacket. I wasn't sure why I'd done it. Maybe to keep it safe. Maybe to remind myself that something had just happened. Something quiet, but not small. I didn't know Odessa well. We'd spoken in passing at committee mixers, a grant review once, but I'd always felt there was more behind her gentle manner. Some weight she carried without advertising it. Tonight, that weight had been publicly unhooked with surgical precision. But even surgical wounds leave scars. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain had started sometime after midnight, soft at first, then steady, tapping a steady rhythm against the window panes of my den. I stared at the ceiling until the shadows began to form shapes I didn't like. Around 2 a.m., I got up, padded barefoot to my old oak desk, and opened my laptop. There it was, an email from Odessa dated almost 4 years ago. Subject line: "Thank you truly." I clicked it open. "I appreciate what you said in the budget review meeting. It helped more than you know." I blinked. I didn't remember saying anything in that meeting. I remembered sitting beside Cambria, sipping lukewarm coffee, nodding at numbers, pretending to look engaged while watching the clock. I had meant to say something. I hadn't, and yet Odessa had thanked me. Maybe because that's what she did, smoothed the air before the storm even started. I leaned back in my chair, the old leather creaking beneath me. On the far shelf, a photo of my late wife Nella caught a stray line of streetlight. She used to say Odessa had a dignity made of quiet bricks. I never quite understood that phrase until now. Nella could see things in people I was too practical to notice. I clicked through my email folders, typing Odessa's name into the search bar. Dozens of results came up: event drafts, volunteer schedules, clinic reports, and always her words measured deferential, careful to give credit away. Glad to assist, but the real credit goes to Thomas and Jane. They stayed late. Not urgent, just a heads up on the supply chain hiccup. No worries. I'm used to being background. That last one hit harder than I expected. I reread it twice. My desk lamp buzzed faintly, casting a pale halo over the scattered papers. I reached for the folder marked Foundation Banquet 2022, Archive. Inside were early drafts of the honoree list. There, on a June printout, Odessa's name was second on the page under Healthcare Legacy. A highlighter / next to it, pink. Then a July version, her name had slipped to 5th. August gone. I found the email thread from the internal committee, re-messaging for Banquet. Let's consider optics. Odessa may come across too institutional for our theme this year, looking for stories that feel fresher, younger, more dynamic. I imagined Odessa kneeling beside a Vietnam vet at the free clinic, her apron speckled with iodine, and time offering warm compresses with one hand and holding the man's shaking fingers with the other. That was dynamic. That was human. I opened my photo archive and found it taken 5 years ago at a mobile clinic event. Odessa crouched beside a cot, her hand wrapped around a patient's wrist, anchoring him as if her touch could delay the inevitable. Her eyes were tired but steady. She didn't look like someone who needed the spotlight, but she sure as hell deserved more than being edited out. I whispered aloud, "Since when does courage need optics?" The room answered with silence. I reached for my coat hanging on the wall peg, slipped my hand into the inside pocket. The silver pin was still there. I hadn't meant to carry it around all day, but I hadn't wanted to leave it at home either. It had nestled into the fabric, resting there like a pressed coin, a weight that made itself known without clinking. It wasn't just a pin anymore. It was a question that kept rustling in my sleeve. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Inside, I sat in the quiet, surrounded by the sounds of my own inaction. The den smelled faintly of lemon oil and the dust of forgotten paperwork. I stared at the screen, Odessa's words flickering at me like an accusation written in kindness. I'm used to being background. Maybe that's what haunted me. She wasn't angry. She didn't push back or demand anything. She left space for others, even when it erased her. I closed the laptop, but the feeling stayed. A thin line had been drawn somewhere between oversight and erasure. I had stood on the wrong side of it quietly, comfortably, and told myself I was neutral, the pin in my jacket pressed against my ribs as I exhaled. Some silences aren't passive. They're built, brick by brick. And tonight I realized I'd helped lay a few of them. I told myself it wasn't surveillance. I wasn't there to intrude or make a scene. But I needed to see. Needed to understand what made Odessa Wren Halberg walk out of that banquet without a word, without even a glance back. The free clinic on Fairmont Avenue looked more like a church basement than a medical facility. Its windows were cloudy with age, the linoleum scuffed down to the color of bone. Inside, the air held the scent of clean linen and something sweeter, cinnamon tea maybe, or cloves steeped in memory. I stood in the hallway a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The lighting was soft, natural. There were no banners, no foundation logos, no cameras clicking from the corners. Only voices low kind, and the occasional shuffle of shoes. Then I saw her. Odessa was kneeling beside a cot, one knee on the tile, the other bent just enough to stabilize her grip. She was tending to a man whose foot was swollen raw at the heel. He winced as she wrapped the gauze, but she spoke to him in gestures, nodding gently, holding his hand through the worst of it. The man said nothing. Couldn't, perhaps, but his eyes never left hers, like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to something solid. He wore an old fatigue jacket. No name, no rank, just the wear of years and a long scar slicing across his throat like an unfinished sentence. A child wandered up from the far hallway, a girl maybe 5 holding a crumpled rose, the kind made of tissue paper and playground hope. She offered it silently to Odessa, who paused, smiled, and took it as if it were a medal. She tucked it into her pocket without ceremony, then turned back to the veteran without missing a beat. That's when I heard the scrape of a chair behind me. "You finally showed up," came a voice, low, cool, and full of a kind of deliberate disappointment. I turned. A woman leaned against the wall, arms crossed, hair silver at the temples, but her spine straight as a parade ground. Her badge read Maura Devane, but she didn't need it. Her presence was enough. Ex-military, you could smell it in her cadence. "Name's Maura," she said. "You must be Hollis. I've read your minutes. Polished, diplomatic, bloodless." I blinked. "I came to see the clinic." "You came late," she said, stepping forward. "Late to the truth. Late to loyalty." I didn't know I said softer than I intended. "You didn't ask." We stood in silence, the weight of things unsaid pressing between us like a folded flag. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a pin silver aged familiar. "Just like Odessa's. She gave hers back, didn't she?" Maura asked, already knowing. I nodded. Maura stepped past me, entered the room, and placed the pin gently on the desk beside a clipboard. Odessa didn't look up. Didn't stop wrapping the next set of bandages. "I don't give medals lightly," Maura said aloud. "But some are earned twice, once in battle, once in being forgotten." She turned to leave. Odessa didn't say a word, didn't touch the pin, but she didn't move it away either. Later, as I prepared to leave, I glanced back one last time. The room had quieted. The tea steam still curled in the air like a benediction. Odessa stood alone now, adjusting the cuff of her cardigan. Her fingers paused briefly at her lapel where Maura's pin now rested, gleaming faintly. Not for the world, for herself. Outside, the sky had turned the color of tarnished pewter. I stepped into the wind with my collar up the silence from that clinic clinging to me like a scent I couldn't shake. The pin in my jacket felt heavier than before. Cambria's secretary had just left for lunch, her heels tapping down the corridor like a metronome of misplaced loyalty. I waited exactly 12 seconds after the door clicked shut before slipping into the hallway, pressing my badge flat against my thigh like a silencer. The archive room had always felt like a mausoleum for good intentions. It lived in the belly of the Civic Center, half-forgotten, dim, dust-moted, and oddly warm. A single fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, its rhythm erratic, like it too knew this wasn't quite sanctioned. Rows of steel shelves stretched in solemn procession. Folders in manila and navy blue. Boxes labeled 2018 Annual Budget and Speaker Notes, unedited. I moved slowly, not out of fear but reverence, like a priest breaking into the vestry to see what had been buried under incense and intent. I found it wedged between two copies of the Civic Beautification Fund, a red folder with no label on the spine, just a faint black stamp. Donor Linked Communications. Tucked inside were a few innocuous budget charts, and then deeper folded in thirds, a document that snapped like a whip across my conscience. A printed draft of the Banquet honoree list. Odessa's name was there, third from the top. In blue ink, Cambria's, no doubt her name, had been scratched out, a single hard line dragging across the letters, then scribbled over again. I exhaled slow and quiet. Another sheet, an email printout from June 18th, subject line, RE honorees, final, final, final. The thread ran cold and sharp. Let's be honest, Odessa doesn't fit the image we're crafting. We need vitality, diversity, photogenic stories. Think PR. Cambria. Another email 2 days later, confirming PR grant awarded. $25,000. Launching storytelling refresh immediately. The ink was real, the signatures real. So were the dates mere hours after Odessa was removed. I felt something stir in my jacket pocket. The silver pin. It had become a weight, a witness. I pulled it out, set it gently beside the printouts, and took a photo with my phone. The contrast was jarring. Polished silver against ink-stained lies. I heard a soft cough. Whipping around, I saw Rita, the foundation intern, standing awkwardly near the door. Her lanyard swung like a pendulum. She looked from the papers to me and said nothing. But her eyes didn't report me either. We held each other's gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable. Then she walked away. Quietly. When I returned home that evening, a letter was waiting in my mailbox. The envelope was thick, embossed with gold foil. I slid it open with my thumbnail. Banquet invitation. I scanned the list. No Odessa. Not among the honorees. Not under lifetime impact. Not in the legacy column. But near the bottom in a delicate cursive font. Blessing speaker, Odessa W. Hallberg. It wasn't recognition. It was theater. A role of formality. A script. They hadn't just erased her. They were turning her into decoration. I saw it happen from across the street. A glint of metal catching the late afternoon light tumbling from Odessa's fingers into the wastebasket outside the foundation building. It barely made a sound, just a soft plink swallowed by wind and leaves. She didn't pause, didn't look back. She just kept walking head low against the November chill, her gray coat drawn tight like armor too worn to hold. Inside the glass lobby, Cambria was shaking hands with a state senator, her posture impeccable, a practiced tilt of the head. Tucked under her arm was a navy folder stamped narrative cohesion. It wasn't irony. It was precision. I crossed the street slowly. The sidewalk was slick with wet leaves, and someone had spilled coffee near the wastebasket, leaving brown splotches that bled into the concrete. A janitor in a navy windbreaker stood nearby, sweeping without urgency. I reached into the bin. The pin sat atop a crushed napkin and a paper cup. Silver unmistakable. Before I could speak, the janitor gently tapped my elbow. Without a word, he plucked the pin out and handed it to me, his gloved hand careful like returning a relic. "Thank you," I said, but he'd already turned away. Later that evening, Odessa answered the door before I knocked. She must have seen me walking up. "I don't want to talk about it," she said. Her voice wasn't cold, it was emptied. "You threw this away?" I said, holding up the pin. "It's over Hollis." Her apartment smelled of lemon soap and oversteeped tea. She didn't invite me in. I didn't ask. When I got home, I didn't eat. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat at my desk, pin resting on top of a blank notepad, and opened the laptop. Time to build a dossier. I started with the email screenshots, the inked-out honoree list, the redacted communications, the final threads. Then the budget trail, $25,000 PR grant, time-stamped perfectly. Next, patient testimonials. I found 3 without even trying. One was from Delroy, the mute veteran, written on yellow notepad paper. All caps misspelled, but it hit like scripture. She stayed. 3. HRs after closing because my foot hurt. The local printer was still open. I took everything on a flash drive. The man behind the counter, a wiry guy in a Pearl Jam t-shirt, didn't ask questions. "Make it look like it matters," I told him. He handed me the finished binder an hour later. Black matte finish, no title on the front, just spine text in white block letters. Odessa service. Unseen. Back home, I flipped through each page, slowly smoothing corners like they were wounds. At the very end, I added a quote copied from her old Army medical commendation. Commended for actions under duress without expectation of recognition. The printer had included a clear sleeve. I slid the silver pin into it. It rested like punctuation. The next morning, my inbox pinged. A new email from Cambria's assistant. Subject: Banquet order of events. Final draft 2. Please confirm Odessa W. Hallberg's attendance as post-dinner benediction speaker. Not an honoree. Not a guest of honor. A closing act. Like the final prayer of a show they didn't want her to headline. The ballroom gleamed like a promise. Golden uplighting bathed the walls, and the chandeliers above shimmered in perfect sync with the quartet's rendition of Clair de Lune. 400 guests, 400 chairs, the smell of lilacs and white linen and buttered rolls. Every fork placed just so. I sat at the far left table binder in my lap, fingers pressed against the matte black cover. I wasn't sure if I'd breathe again until Odessa appeared. At table 12, Asa sat between his parents. He clutched something folded and fragile construction paper bent along creases, crayons bleeding outside the lines. I caught a glimpse of red, her old medic coat drawn like a cape. Backstage, Odessa stood behind the velvet curtain. I could see her reflection in the angled mirror meant for final touch-ups. She wasn't touching up. Her fingers held the silver pin. It lay in her palm like a vow. "Ladies and gentlemen," Martinson's voice rang with pleasant rehearsed tone. "Please welcome our post-dinner blessing speaker, a woman of long-standing service, Ms. Odessa Wren Hallberg." There was polite applause, the kind reserved for filler between wine pours. She stepped out. Her shoes made no sound on the carpeted dais. The silver pin now sat just above her heart, fastened to a modest charcoal gray dress. I could hear the whisper of her fabric as she moved past each table one by one like a silent roll call. Cambria watched from near the mayor's table, wine glass in hand. Her lips didn't move, but her eyes flicked first to Odessa, then to me, then back. Odessa reached the podium. She didn't adjust the mic. She looked out. One long breath. Then she said it. Just one word. Remember. Not loud. Not whispered. Just enough. and then she turned and walked away. No curtain drop, no music swell, just chairs sliding back. First one, then a dozen, then the full room. 400 people stood not clapping, not cheering, just standing. Back straight, eyes forward. A room full of vertebrae and conscience. Cambria did not stand. The mayor did. Odessa didn't look back. She walked through the side aisle, the train of her dress barely brushing the floor. Asa held his drawing high. Odessa saw it, paused, nodded, kept walking. Later, when the lights dimmed and the coffee urns hissed, I approached the podium. The silver pin sat atop the velvet cloth-centered calm. It wasn't hers anymore. It was all of ours. She handed me the binder without looking down. I didn't read it. Odessa said, her breath curling into the crisp January air. I lived it. The cardboard felt heavier than I remembered, maybe because I no longer needed it. We stood in the half-cleared lot behind the Veterans Community Center. The land had once been a junkyard, then a parking overflow, then abandoned. Today it was something else entirely, a beginning. The fencing was skeletal, the soil cold and unyielding. But Odessa's sleeves were rolled up. Her hammer hung from one hand, the other adjusting a makeshift blueprint pinned to a corkboard. At her feet, a small pile of cedar posts lay waiting. Behind us, the laughter of teenagers trying to figure out how to mix compost with too much enthusiasm. It was good noise. A folded newspaper peeked from my coat pocket. Headline above the crease, "Quietest Speech in Banquet History. Sparks Statewide Reflection." There had been op-eds, letters, even an interview request from a Connecticut NPR affiliate. Odessa declined every one. 2 days ago, the foundation sent a formal email apology reinstatement invitation to return as a senior honoree next spring. She deleted it in front of me. "I don't want a plaque," she said. "I want soil." I heard gravel crunch behind us. Maura Devane approached from the back gate, her walk slow but sure. She wore a brown leather coat lined with wool, her silver hair coiled into its usual tight bun. Without a word, she extended an envelope. From a few of us, she said, "Retired Medics' Circle. Some still remember you stitching people up with one hand while holding a radio with the other." Odessa opened the flap, glanced at the check, and nodded. "No thanks. No drama. Just quiet gratitude." Maura then pulled something else from her coat pocket. The pin. Her own. The one she'd given Odessa weeks ago. "I figured you might want to keep this one after all," Maura said gently. But Odessa shook her head. "No. It's yours." Instead, Maura reached forward and unpinned the badge currently on Odessa's collar, the one Hollis had retrieved from the wastebasket, the one Odessa had once left behind. Then, with slow precision, she refastened it just beneath Odessa's shoulder seam. "You earned this back long ago," she said. "Let it mean what you make of it now." Odessa blinked, but said nothing. Then she turned toward the cedar posts. She lifted one, planted it firmly, and hammered twice. From a folded bag, she withdrew a placard whitewashed wood letters painted by hand for those who served in silence. No one clapped, but a few hats came off. I stepped back, letting the moment hold. That evening, I opened my email. One new message from Asa's parents. Subject 16. Next fall. Body. He wants to volunteer full-time when he turns 16. Says he wants to learn from the lady who said nothing but meant everything. I sit alone on the bench beneath the wide-leafed sycamore, its canopy like an open hand shielding the morning. The brass plaque fastened behind me catches a slant of sunlight. Warm, not hot. Just enough to notice. Just enough to remember. It reads, Odessa W. Halberg. Service beyond ceremony. Around me, the veteran's garden of quiet honor breathes gently into spring. The dogwoods are in bloom again, blush pink and tender. The fountain in the center pool babbles with soft persistence. No grand statue, no flags. Just water green and benches placed with intention. A little girl dashes past her junior medic vest 2 sizes too big. Across the back, written in black marker, O. Halberg. I don't think she knows who Odessa is, not really, but she knows the name means something. To her right, a group of teenage girls huddle around a folded stretcher. They giggle through instructions adjusting the red duct tape crosses stuck to their first aid kits. They don't salute. They serve. Odessa moves among them. Not a speech, not a microphone, not a title in sight. Just sleeves rolled up and a garden apron with dirt at the hem. She's showing one girl how to bandage with one hand, how to breathe through someone else's panic without catching it yourself. From where I sit, she looks exactly the same as when I first saw her kneeling beside a veteran no one would touch. Cambria resigned quietly last year. No headlines. Just a name removed from a masthead. Martinson transferred to a smaller parish in Vermont closer to trout fishing, I heard. The foundation still exists, but smaller now. Leaner. Less ceremony, more accountability. A few of the new board members came to help pour soil here last fall. One asked to learn how to set a splint. Odessa never mentioned any of it. The only thing she said to me this week was, "Bring gloves next time." I open my notebook pages softened by weather and coffee stains. On a fresh line, I write, "She never needed a podium. She built her own ground." I look down at the plaque again, not to reread it, just to feel the warmth against my spine like a quiet voice saying, "You were here, and it mattered." A gentle breeze stirs the mulch. Somewhere behind me, a young voice says, "Ready to learn Ms. Halberg," and Odessa replies, "Then let's begin." The breeze under the sycamore carried a faint scent of earth and linen, and somewhere behind me, children's laughter mixed with the soft burble of the garden fountain. The old silver pin, once discarded and scuffed, now gleamed gently on Odessa's collar, right where it always belonged. Some honors aren't bestowed. They're reclaimed quietly over time by showing up, staying kind, and letting the work speak louder than the wounds. As my father once told me, some roots run deeper than applause. If you've ever been overlooked or quietly pushed aside, know this: there's still soil for you to grow something lasting. Have you ever had to build your own ground when no one offered you a stage? Share your story, or pass this one on to someone who needs it.